Now, history very rarely dedicates one political moment to an individual, but surely Brexit belongs to Nigel Farage. And he joins me now. Hello, Mr. Farage.
Good morning.
Great to have you on the show. Are you celebrating?
I celebrated on the 31st of January, the day we actually left the European Union. I will celebrate the fact that the agony, the war is over. I'll celebrate that. But I suspect when we see the detail of the deal, correct my language, the new European Union treaty, I suspect when I see the detail, I'll be disappointed. But it's like many things in history. Winning a war is one thing, winning a peace is another. And I suspect we're going to find ourselves far too closely aligned to EU rules in the years to come.
Do you think, in the national interest, for the preservation of our collective mental health, that both sides of the argument, the Remainers, the Brexiteers, should essentially swallow a little pride, hold their nose, accept the deal and move forward?
Well, it's not about swallowing pride. It's just that for me, and don't forget, this has been 30 years of my life. I gave everything up to do this. I believed in it so strongly. And to finish up in a situation where effectively we're going to be tied to the single market rulebook, even though not being a member of it. All I'm saying, Mark, is it's a disappointing end, perhaps a predictable end, but I do think that the years and years of trench warfare do come to an end on the 1st of January. And that's a good thing in many ways, because it's sort of consumed our lives, really, hasn't it?
Indeed, or perhaps this European treaty, as you call it, Nigel, might make slightly better reading than what we would have had in the event that Theresa May had prevailed. Of course, the Chequers Agreement pretty much signed us up to a customs union, which, as you well know, means no trade deals. The great advantage of Brexit disappears at one stroke. So could we consider this deal to be the lesser of two evils?
It's not very different to Theresa May's deal. And if I was listening to you right now in Northern Ireland, I'd be screaming at the radio, because Northern Ireland has been cut off from the rest of the UK. This deal is 95% the same as the one that Mrs. May agreed to. The key benefit is whatever happens with Northern Ireland, the rest of the UK stays outside the customs union. And you just said to me, you call it a treaty. Believe you me, Monsieur Barnier calls it a treaty. This is a new EU treaty. We're going to be bound to it for a long time to come. Hey, is it better than where we were 5 years ago? Yes, it is. Is it good enough to allow us to become the Singapore, the really dynamic, booming economy in this part of the world? No.
A lot of callers to the show have said to me that actually any deal is a compromise. Do you think, therefore, you'd have preferred no deal? And do you think we would have prevailed to a greater extent in a no deal scenario, or Australia, as the Prime Minister likes to call it?
Well, no deal was never going to happen. That's been a charade over the last few weeks. I saw Boris Johnson on Sky News saying it was now highly likely there'd be no deal, with a smirk on his face. This was all to say to the British public, we're battling hard for you. It was never even, I'm afraid, a possibility. Look, I coined a phrase during the referendum. I met with a team of very senior economists, and we tried to work out, what would happen if the European Union put forward a set of proposals that weren't acceptable. And that's where the phrase, no deal is better than a bad deal, came from. And yes, I do think a complete separation for the long-term economic health of the country would have been better. But we are where we are. And, I can see the coastal communities continuing to fight and battle for their conditions. But I think, as a realist, even though there are things in this treaty that I don't like, and I'm going to have a lawyer working on this all over Christmas, and I'll come out, with a full pros and cons of this new treaty, which will be nearly 2,000 pages long. But I'm a realist, and I know that the Brexit wars are over. They finish on the 1st of January. And to be honest, we've got an even bigger crisis consuming us, haven't we?
Well, we do indeed. And curiously, my audience are finding their enthusiasm for this deal dimmed slightly, Mr. Farage, by the fact that the politicians that have struck this deal are also the ones that are consigning many of my listeners to penury through the COVID measures. We'll come to that because our handling this pandemic might be your next political project as part of Reform UK. But just on Brexit, you mentioned that you've dedicated so much of your life to it. And I understand that it won't make satisfactory reading when you look through the fine print. But fundamentally, the fact that we're out of the European Union, which, as you rightly say, happened a year ago, that is the ultimate insurance policy, is it not, for ever closer union, the euro, single European army,
Yes.
and other entanglements with the European project. Ultimately, the economic relationship prevails and the political relationship is dead and buried. And that must surely cause you some comfort.
This is a massive historical victory. It's also a very unlikely victory. I mean, I remember for the first 15 years of campaigning for this and doing this, and in my early days as an MEP, I mean, the entirety of Westminster, the media, the business lobby, the trade unions, everybody accepted membership of the EU as a given. And those of us that fought this on the outside were considered to be a pretty odd, eccentric bunch, cranks, fruitcakes, loonies. I mean, we were called all of those things.
Pretty offensive, actually.
Well, it was offensive, but, if you take on the establishment, if you challenge the status quo, whether it's in politics or science or business, this is how they behave all through history. And yes, I gave my life to it. And the reason I did is I didn't see anybody inside the Conservative and Labour parties who were prepared to sacrifice their career to do it. So I thought, no, I'm going to fight this fight. But I could not have done this on my own. There were tens of thousands of people out there who gave money, who gave time, who put leaflets through doors. It really was a grassroots army against the Westminster establishment. And you're quite right. However unhappy I may be about some of this detail, in 100 years' time, kids in school will read about what happened and read that the people beat the politicians. And it is the biggest constitutional change for 300 years. It is a massive step in the right direction. And I will say this about the rest of Europe. I very much hope that this is the beginning of the end of the European Union. A Europe of trade and cooperation is fine. One run by the unelected Barniers and von der Leyens, I find pretty repulsive.
Indeed, it's hard to imagine that so many of those countries that are now struggling with enormous debt because of the COVID-19 pandemic and their bankrolling of the COVID measures, they're not going to prevail, are they, in this European bloc, especially given the fact that they're having a colossal whip round at the moment to sort of shore up the wider European economies?
Well, here's the truth of it. The north and the south of Europe are bitterly divided by the euro, a currency that was never, ever suitable to the Mediterranean and has caused a just terrible economic carnage in Greece and Portugal and Italy and countries like that. So that's the first big split that you see. The richer north, the poorer south, the perception that the euro's benefited Germany and pretty much hurt everybody else, which, by the way, is true. And then you've got this sort of terrible divide between the east and the west of Europe on cultural issues, Christianity, immigration, gay marriage, all of these things. I mean, so much so that the Hungarians and the Poles recently vetoed the entire EU budget. So, with the European Union, you're trying to take very different countries with very different cultures to force them all together inside the same straitjacket and removing the power of voters to change anything. So, no, I mean, this will make you laugh, but I'm a committed European in the sense that I do believe in Europe. I love Europe, but I think what's beautiful about it is that we have all these different countries and different cultures. I think what is loathsome is what's been built in Brussels. And with Brexit done, maybe not perfectly, but with Brexit done, that is a message that I'll certainly be taking around Europe over the course of the next few years.
With Brexit more or less done, Mr. Farage, you're far too young to retire. I don't think you're that much of a gardener. So what's next?
Well, get the pubs open. Yeah. That's what I'd like to see, particularly on Christmas Eve.
I agree.
I've put an application in for the Brexit Party name to change. And by the way, what a success that's been, because when we formed the Brexit Party, it looked like it was never going to happen. I put an application in to call it Reform UK. I do think we need fundamental wholesale reform in this country. I think our trust in the House of Lords, in cronyism, the voting system, postal vote fraud, I could go on and on. So I do think we need fundamental structural change, modernisation and reform in terms of how the country's run. And that's going to be the next step.
Do you think there is an intellectual and creative malaise within the Conservative Party that somehow gives you an opportunity to find some political real estate? Because, I mean, let's be honest, UKIP was formed in order to establish a referendum, and then the Brexit Party was formed to enforce the result. So I wonder whether you have another role in the future of this country that goes beyond our relationship with the European Union and into sort of the Britain that we've got to have going forward, global Britain, how it's going to look.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And look, I'm not going to retire. I'm going to go on writing and commentating and broadcasting and being active in politics. Yes, I mean, Brexit should be the first step of absolutely fundamental wholesale reform. And I think really this pandemic has shown you just how badly run the country is. I mean, I just think time and again, whether it's track and trace or whether it's the testing regime in the early days, we keep being told by government, they keep making big promises and then failing to deliver. So, yeah, but I promise you one thing, I'm not going to go away.
But is that as a vocal critic, and a very eloquent one at that, Nigel, or as a political campaigner? I mean, will you go after Tory seats at next election? I mean, is this going to be a serious political move?
That's all a long way off. That's 4 years off.
Yeah.
And we have a Conservative Party with a big majority. The party itself, back to your first comment on this, the Conservative Party itself is completely unreformed. The only difference is they adopted the Brexit agenda, because if they hadn't, they would have been electorally destroyed. And that's the only change that's happened. What I don't know is how much appetite is there out there in the public for a new kind of politics. I will make the arguments. Whether the appetite's there, I think that remains to be seen.
Rapid fire before we let you go. This is, I guess, an achievement of sorts for Boris Johnson, though, on a personal level. He won the election in December 2019 with a strong mandate to get Brexit done, and he has more or less got Brexit done. So what are your thoughts about the Prime Minister at this moment?
Well, the 31st of January was very, very important because it was never going to happen under Mrs May, which is why I was very proud to get rid of Mrs May, which is what the Brexit Party did in those European elections. Boris, look, he's somebody who, only 3 days ago told us there were only 147 lorries on the M20, where we know there were thousands parked in lay-bys. Yeah. So, Boris is good at playing fast and loose. But look, he and Michael Gove were the two senior Conservative politicians who, when the referendum came, albeit late in the day, but that's not the point, they had the guts to back Brexit, and thank goodness they did. So yes, Boris will be seen as the man that finished the job, perhaps not perfectly, but yes, he's done what he said he'd do. On the big picture, I suspect on some of the detail, such as we'll be back in charge of our fisheries, history may judge some of those aspects a little more harshly. But on the big stuff, the war is over. It has gone on for decades in this country, from the Maastricht Rebellion onwards. It's never, ever gone away. The fight over whether we should be part of the European structures or not. And now we're out, arguably with a new treaty that's a bit closer to a partnership agreement. It's not perfect, but goodness me, it's still progress.
And it was a war. It is over. And you were a key general. Will you be indulging in a tipple tonight by way of a sort of low-level, socially distanced, COVID-secure celebration?
Yeah, none of that's my style, I got to tell you.
But are you going to have a drink? Because I know that you're these days your body's a temple, Nigel. We think of you, those iconic shots of you behind the pub with a pint of old speckled hen. But you've been quite abstemious recently. So will you have a bit of a tipple tonight to sort of celebrate this moment?
I certainly will. Yes, I certainly will.
And will it be British?
I just wish the pubs were open.
I know, it's devastating.